Almost 30 years ago, a revolutionary idea changed the way Europe regarded road collisions. It has probably saved countless lives, but it's yet to be fully accepted by politicians. In 1995, a serious crash occurred on the E4 motorway near Stockholm, Sweden. 5 young people were traveling in a hatchback car when the vehicle went into a roll near the exit ramp for the Ikea store. The car smashed into a concrete structure supporting a streetlight by the side of the road, and all 5 passengers were killed. I am rather sure they were speeding, and as it was wet, they probably aquaplaned, says Claes Tingvall. Almost 30 years on, he struggles to remember all the details, but he is sure about one thing. The car was a 3-door Peugeot 205 GTI, red. More than 500 people died on Sweden's roads that year, but this tragedy signaled a turning point in how Tingvall, and eventually the world, regarded road crashes. An estimated 1.2 million lives are cut short by road traffic collisions globally each year, while millions more suffer often life-changing injuries. While the death toll has decreased slightly over the past 13 years, the number of fatalities on the world's roads are 5% lower than they were in 2010. According to the World Health Organization, WHO, progress has been slow and falls far short of the WHO's target of having the number of road deaths by the end of this decade. Today, Sweden has some of the lowest rates of road traffic fatalities in the world, and the story of how the country has strived to bring that number to zero provides a lesson for other countries where the death toll has remained stubbornly high. Back in 1995, Tingvall had become the head of road safety for the Swedish Road Administration. He was very well qualified for the role, but quite unlike any of his predecessors. Instead of coming up through the ranks of road transport engineers and bureaucrats, Tingvall had a medical background. He had studied at the renowned Karolinska Institute, where he had gained a doctorate in the epidemiology of injuries. In the 1990s, the road safety world was focused on technological measures such as seat belts, car seats for children, and airbags. These measures softened the impact of what is sometimes called the second collision in car crashes, the impact of passengers within a vehicle, moments after a crash has occurred. Less attention was given to injuries sustained by road users who had the misfortune to be outside the vehicle. Tingvall knew that this approach didn't go far enough. The car can't solve everything because it doesn't work like that, he says. You bottom out the safety net of the vehicle. He saw that injuries were a result of combining a speeding mass with the built environment and many other variables, including road conditions and the driver's behavior, as well as the safety features on the vehicle. This systems approach wasn't new to road safety experts, but it differed from the way officials looked at road collisions, which was primarily through a criminal justice lens. After the crash near Stockholm, Tingvall called the regional director of the Transport Authority to his office in Borlänge, about 220 kilometers, 137 miles away from the capital. He asked the official what he planned to do following the incident. The reply stated the authority would swiftly replace the concrete lamppost. But Tingvall demanded that all such supports be removed, since they were clearly a hazardous feature to have right next to a road. Work began to improve Sweden's clear zones next to roads, but it caused disquiet among officials. Wasn't changing the road layout tantamount to admitting liability for the crash? Tingvall did indeed believe that the authorities were responsible, not for reckless driving or for the crash itself, but for the fact that the incident was as fatal as it was. And within a couple of years, Swedish parliamentarians would align themselves with this way of viewing road safety. They said, "You, as provider of the road transport system, are no longer allowed to kill people on that mass level that you've done," Tingvall recalls. Globally, he estimates that at least 100 million people have died on the roads since the birth of the motor car. Road transport developed in relative freedom, outside the control of a safety culture that put the preservation of life beyond all other values. This sets it apart from other modes of transport. Passengers traveling by train, boat, or plane have high expectations of safety. Of course, accidents do occur, but stringent protocols mean these are relatively rare events. Even for dangerous jobs like construction work or oil drilling, safety is of paramount value. Workers are kept safe by a mix of training, protocols, and equipment planned by experts in recognition of the risky nature of the work. But from a very early point in the development of the motor car, the industry decided to focus the attention of lawmakers away from the inherent dangerousness of cars to the actions of the person behind the wheel. Officials were no longer allowed to design roads for idealized drivers who never became distracted or exceeded the speed limit. From the 1930s, the Automotive Safety Foundation, ASF, a U.S. body created in 1937 that was backed and controlled by car manufacturers until it was merged into the Highway Users Federation in 1970, sponsored films, posters, and TV items about the importance of driving responsibly, and they lobbied for driving tests. There was a lot of blame directed at the driver, and they were quite willing to go after reckless drivers aggressively because they were a threat to the reputation of the industry, says Peter Norton, a historian at the University of Virginia and author of Fighting Traffic: The Dawn of the Motor Age in the American City. Traffic enforcement principles were really developed auto industry themselves directly. They sponsored traffic enforcement training for police officers. Norton has found that the ASF paid for a traffic enforcement program at Northwestern University, which trained students from across the U.S. They also paid to establish the traffic division of the International Association of Chiefs of Police, which advised police forces on traffic enforcement. But bad drivers weren't the only target of car manufacturers. Pedestrians were often involved in crashes too, so they lobbied for the development of highways that excluded them, but which also encouraged people to drive faster. The resulting idea that still persists today to some degree could be considered as analogous to the infamous slogan from the National Rifle Association of America: "Cars don't kill people, people do." On 22nd of May 1997, the Swedish government presented Bill 1996-97-137 to Parliament. It cemented zero deaths as a long-term goal for road fatalities. It reiterated that transport designers were responsible for maintaining the road system, while drivers were expected to drive responsibly and follow the rules. However, a further clause stated that if the road users do not adequately assume their share of the responsibility, for example, due to a lack of knowledge or skill, or if personal injuries occur or risk occurring for other reasons, the system designers must take additional further measures to prevent people being killed or seriously injured. This meant that officials were no longer allowed to design roads for idealized drivers who never became distracted or exceeded the speed limit. They had to make roads for real people who made mistakes. As Tingvall puts it, it should be up to the professional community to make sure that normal people doing normal mistakes don't lead to them killing themselves or someone else. Even intentional law-breaking was to be considered when designing the system. The reality is that drivers do speed, and they get distracted by their phones or other passengers in the car. Don't pretend that there are laws that you know everyone will follow, Tingvall says. That's very unprofessional. You would never do that in aviation or in other areas where you really care for safety. Collisions are more common on roundabouts than intersections, but they are much less deadly. One of the key actions that came from Vision Zero was to conduct internal investigations of every fatal road collision in Sweden in parallel to any criminal investigation. The pattern that began to emerge revealed that crash victims were not, as many in the road transport sector, assumed drunk and irresponsible drivers. For the most part, they were people who made small mistakes within a system that had no margin for error. Tingvall did not develop Vision Zero alone, but alongside many like-minded individuals from diverse backgrounds. From the Karolinska Institute, he worked alongside Anders Lee, an expert in reconstructing crashes from photographs, Anders Kullgren, an engineer, and Maria Kraft, who is Sweden's head of road safety today. Tingvall still works closely with all three. To underline the shift in thinking, Tingvall commissioned the artist Carl Gilg to create a series of strange illustrations, which were used in presentations about Vision Zero. They showed everyday scenes, but with the risks of horizontal kinetic energy, i.e. speed, transposed to height. The resulting effect showed pedestrians walking along pavements and crossings next to dizzying, precipitous drops. After decades of government campaigns that aimed to change driver behavior, the pictures came as a shock. They didn't depict dangerous drivers. One pair of images didn't show drivers at all, but a network of roads that seemed to pose an inherent risk to people going about their everyday lives. The onus fell to transport planners, not drivers, to fix that situation.